And for this week's Think Tank Central segment, we'll focus on what that visit means for Iran-Iraq unity and what it says about U.S. influence in a country that America has bankrolled and bled over for decades. Joining me from Washington is Benham Ben Taleblu, Senior Fellow at FDD, the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Benham, so good to have you back on the show.
Thanks for having me back, Barbara. Always good to be with you.
Thanks. So after the productive period in Baghdad, all the signing of the free trade deals, the MOUs, the high-profile visits to Shiite Islam's holy cities of Karbala and Najaf, what do you make of this red carpet that was rolled out for the Iranian...
So Iranian President Hassan Rouhani's trip to Iraq aims to accomplish several things. Yes, the President aims to accomplish several things. The first is, of course, to strengthen political and economic ties between Iran and Iraq.
Sure.
The second is to find some kind of high-level way to offset U.S. sanctions. And the third is to continue to increase Rouhani's stature, given the political pressure that he's under. Out of all of these three, I would say the most important is the second, to find ways to offset U.S. sanctions.
Mm-hmm. And that the fact that Iraq is supposed to be a bridge now between the economies in the region. We know very well that that bridge can also be used to skirt sanctions and smuggle weaponry from the Gulf to the Mediterranean. So tell us about this new deal for a rail link between Iran and Basra.
So this is actually quite crucial because Iran is currently looking to deepen its footprint in Iraq in ways that are not just military. The rail link is just one. Iran is looking to make sure that small and medium-sized enterprises in Iraq are reliant on Iran, that the cross-border commerce that is not valued in U.S. dollars continues and also grows. Mm-hmm. While there is some initial reporting that Rouhani's trip was not ultimately successful in getting the high-level kind of non-dollar denominated transactions fully cleared through and fully pushed and having Baghdad officially skirt U.S. sanctions.
Right.
Iran's sanctions evasion network is more informal, and it will rely on things like transportation, infrastructure, Iranian-owned or controlled businesses, Hawala networks, religious foundations to offset that sanctions pressure. And these rail links also show that Iran is looking to do more than just commerce with Iraq. It's looking to integrate Iraq into its larger patchwork of states, countries, clients that are part of this growing land bridge that Iran is looking to use to project power into the Mediterranean, and also part of this axis of resistance, this constellation of political and military forces that Iran wants to wield in the region.
Now, I also saw reference to plans to stand up some type of a joint Iraq-Iran bank. Washington, does it have any leverage at all in preventing this blatant violation of sanctions?
Well, this is a really great question because Washington's leverage is not just economic, it's political, and it has to be willing to use that leverage. And thus far, I think there have been bipartisan foreign policy failures in Iraq and Syria when it comes to countering Iran's footprint. And you just mentioned the desire to set up a joint bank. That is not a political, that is not a military Iranian adventure. That is a political economic adventure that could be thwarted through some kind of hand-holding and arm-twisting by Washington. But it requires Washington to pay attention to the daily ins and outs of politics in Iraq. And by virtue of geography and demography, and in some cases you could say destiny, Iran is very attuned to those daily ins and outs in Baghdad, and Washington simply hasn't been. It's developments like this desire to create a joint bank or integrate rail systems that should make Washington cautious.
Well, are we seeing any signs of some type of doubled activity out of Washington to try to prevent this and nip it in the bud?
I credit the administration for framing the Iran threat properly. I think for more than a decade in this town, and again watching those debates in Washington, Iran was discussed only, or primarily I should say, as the nuclear issue first, or the nuclear threat only. The Trump administration in October 2017 rolled out a more comprehensive policy, but thus far has failed to act on or operationalize the regional dimension of that comprehensive policy. And it's the regional dimension that's sorely lacking. We know that in Syria, Israel is doing much of the military pushback.
Right.
But in Iraq, the U.S. has recently designated a Shiite militia, Harakat Hezbollah Nujaba, which is led by designated terrorist Sheikh Akram al-Kabi. This man has pledged allegiance to Khamenei, but he is not the only Shiite militia leader that has pledged allegiance to Khamenei, and his militia is not the only militia that is a terrorist group. Washington needs to step up the pace of these designations to name and shame parts of the Iraqi paramilitary forces and even those entities who are now part of the Iraqi government, to say that no, if you work with an entity that has American blood on your hands, you cannot get U.S. money.
Absolutely. And right now that has yet to be done, yet to be communicated to Baghdad.
That has yet to be done.
Now, I was shocked, actually.
Some could say the sanctions do. Some could say that initial designation of Nujaba does send a signal, but again, Washington will need to follow up on it.
Now, I was actually shocked to read a statement from President Saleh's office that among all the subjects discussed with Rouhani was coordination and cooperation on counter-terror programs. How does that jive with the U.S. investment of so much treasure and money over the years?
It's really, in some ways, I would say, a shame to hear that from such a respected figure like Saleh.
Right.
It's been interesting to watch Saleh in office because he has actually been one of the first politicians to come out after President Trump said that the U.S. was in Iraq to watch Iran, and he kind of chastised the U.S. president there. Saleh has, I would say, in Washington, some broad levels of bipartisan support for his moderate position, especially within the constellation of Kurdish forces in northern Iraq. But Saleh's decision to kind of praise Iran's involvement in Iraq, I would say, is worrisome. We know that historically some Kurdish forces in the north have turned a blind eye to the IRGC's activity in Iraq, using Iraq as a transportation hub for logistics and weapons. That's a problem. And if Iraq is seeing Iran's involvement as productive there, that's an even bigger problem.
For goodness sakes, I mean, what is next if this unity of the Ummah, the brotherhood between Iran and Iraq that's been flagged all week, coming at the expense of the very, very costly security program that Washington has installed there over so many years? I mean, what's next? Giving the PMU, the Iranian, the Shiite militias, access to M1 Abrams tanks? Or what about F-16 fighters?
You know, I'm glad you mentioned the Popular Mobilization Units, or the PMUs, because this is, in some ways, Iran's ultimate strategy to co-opt the Iraqi state. Yes, there are elements of the PMU that are not loyal to Iran, but the bulk of them are comprised of groups that have previously received training, funding, political material support from Tehran and/or the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Quds Force in particular. So this is very worrisome, because Iran has a long-term goal for Iraq, and despite all the blood, despite all the treasure, despite all the political bickering for more than 2 decades in Washington over the Iraq issue, we still have not been able to contest Iranian influence in Iraq. Now, I'm not naive. Iraq and Iran do share bonds, but they also share key differences. And a key difference is that Iraq has the potential to be strong, stable, and most importantly, sovereign. And Iran wants to keep Iraq weak, divided, and not necessarily so sovereign. America wants to keep it sovereign, and it's there that we can accentuate the divide between the two.
And what if you were a betting man, Iraq becoming a stable source of stability for the region, a bulwark against this Iranian bridge, or a province of Iran?
You know, I never like saying that the answer is somewhere in between, but the honest answer right now is somewhere in between. Washington is interested in contesting Tehran, but it's really more a matter of political will than material capability right now. Iran, I don't think, will be able to transform Iraq into a province overnight, but is slated to continue politically, militarily, economically intervening in that country's affairs for the foreseeable future. Washington needs to find ways to contest this and to keep signaling to Baghdad that your future should lie with Washington and not with Tehran. But this needs to be a multi-generational, multi-administration effort to get Iraq out of Iran's orbit and make sure it can stand up on its own 2 feet.
All right. Well, on that note, Benham Ben Taleblu.